God's grace, mercy, and peace are yours in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So, parties, boy, they can be a great blast, or they can be not so much fun, just depending on, right, who's there. I mean, who's going to be on the guest list when you have a party? And so I started pondering this, right, for a few moments, and I thought there's kind of 4 categories of people that show up at parties, get invited, and they kind of do, how they fit into the whole environment of the party and things of that nature. And so I thought I'd just highlight those 4 and see maybe you can identify which one you would be part of. But anyway, the first one that came to mind is the one who says, it's time to have a party. I mean, you got to have the person who says there's a reason to have a party. Let's have a party. Let's get together. It could be any kind of thing, right? It could be, football team wins or a birthday party, or we had lots of parties through the Christmas season and New Year's. But somebody's got to say, let's have a party. And that's the kind of person. And that person, when the party happens, is usually out visiting, hanging out with people, group here, group there, talking about this, talking about that, and just, big idea and having a great time with everybody who's come to the party. And that'd be kind of one type of person who shows up at the party. Maybe you're one of those people. But then there's got to be, if the party's actually going to happen, so you have the first person says, let's have a party. The second person says, well, I guess this is what we need to do to make that party happen. And there's that one. They organize and they plan and they prepare the food, and they're the ones who invite the people and schedule the time and the place. And they're the ones who organize the whole thing, make it happen. If it was just up to the first person, it would still never happen. They'd have the idea, but there'd still be no party. Or, there would be nothing to eat or drink or things of that nature. So the second person at this party is the one who organizes, makes everything happen. In fact, even while the party is happening, leading up to the party, they're planning, organizing. During the party, they're serving, making sure everything's working, everybody's doing stuff, having a good time. Afterwards, they're cleaning up. That's person number 2. Now, the third person that might come to this party is the kind of person who might say, I don't know, who's going to be there? Is there going to be a lot of people? I'm not comfortable with a ton of people, or if it's, but they'll come. And then what they might end up doing is finding a group of friends, and they'll kind of move off to a quiet place in the room or in the space there, and just visit with a few. But they might also offer to help. If that person who's running around trying to scramble and make sure everything's organized and everything, they might say, hey, can I help you with that? Do that. Stay afterwards to clean up dishes, that kind of thing. So that's person number 3. Now, person number 4. They are the life of the party. Everybody knows when this person shows up to the party, because they're probably late, for one thing. And when they enter the room, they have all the charisma and the activity, and everybody knows this person's here. And now it's going to be fun. The first person said, let's have a party. The second person organized it. The third person is gathering together a few friends. And the fourth person says, now it can start, right? But like I said, they're probably late because this is the second party of the evening. They've already been to somebody else's party, and now they're coming to yours, and they're probably going to leave early because they're going off to somebody else's party. They just get invited to all the parties, life of the party. But I would encourage you, don't ask them to bring the chips, because they won't bring them. Either they will have forgotten, or they're at the first party that they went to, right? So, it takes all kinds of people to have a really good party. And we're going to see that that's what happens here in John chapter 2 as well. There's all kinds of people that have been invited to this wedding feast, and it takes all kinds for this party to be really a good party. And so as you saw in those opening verses that Pastor Dinger read for us, you had this wedding feast, and probably what happened is as much of the town of Cana and surrounding area were invited to this party. It was kind of a big deal. And Cana was on a route that what's the word I'm looking for? Traveled, that's the word, transported. All I could think of was Captain Kirk. But anyway, travel on this road between destinations, and Cana was kind of a stopover place. And so Jesus and the disciples and Jesus' mother, even though they were in the town of Nazareth, they probably knew a whole bunch of people, maybe had some relatives living in this town of Cana. And so they get invited to this wedding reception. Now, at this wedding reception, this feast, this is where we have the Epiphany, where Jesus Christ reveals something about his character and his glory in the midst of the people there. And these 4 different groups we're going to look at have different responses to Jesus Christ revealing his glory. But let me first say this, that it was not just a simple party trick, turning water into wine. It wasn't some magician show to entertain. That's not what Jesus was doing. In fact, as we go through and look at the 4 different groups of folks here, some of them didn't even know it happened. And yet there will be a response. So it wasn't just a party trick. In fact, it was the exact opposite of a party trick. Because, magic show, party trick, there's usually trying to hide something. But Jesus is doing this to reveal something. To reveal something about who he is. And that people would believe in him. So as we're going through this, the first group of people we'll explore looking at are the newlyweds. It is a wedding feast on their behalf. And so we have the newlyweds. And what's the first thing we find out about what's happening at this reception? There is a wine crisis. There is a wine crisis. Now, just to make sure I paint the backdrop correctly here, the context, the cultural context of what's happening in this Middle Eastern culture is if the wine runs out, that is a horrific situation. I mean, it is horrific. If we run out of wine, I tell people drink some juice, right? The punch is pretty good. But for them, it would have been horrendous. Because what's happening here is they will celebrate this wedding for up to 7 days. Now, I think we should return to that personally. Feasting and drinking for 7 days. This current model of the wedding at 3, the dinner at 5, waiting for the wedding cake to be cut at 7, home by 8. I mean, that's pathetic, Let's eat and drink for 7 days and really enjoy the feast. But so, it really was this celebratory. They elevated the marriage. That's what it was about. They elevated this wedding. And so even throughout the scriptures, when Jesus talks about the bride, the church being the bride, his bride, it's an elevation of this relationship and a celebration of what this means. And so for 7 days, they would feast. And it really made sure that this couple got started on the right foot, culturally and socially. In fact, a poor wedding reception, a poor wedding feast could doom the couple, really. I mean, in some cases, if it went so poorly that this couple, if it did not succeed well, then they would be almost banished from that community. They would have to go find someplace else to live because it had gone so poorly. There was definitely a reciprocity kind of issue here, because if you got invited to somebody else's reception and feast and ate their food and drank their wine for a week, it was the expectation that you would get invited to their kid's wedding and have the same experience. And again, like I said, it really set a couple up for success in the culture. But here's the thing, when the wine was gone, the party was over. That was the thing. So not only figuratively and literally did the wine represent joy, but when it ended, so did the joy. It was done. And to have it end too soon resulted in shame and guilt. It resulted in that idea later on in life. I mean, can you imagine at the 20-year anniversary? Oh yeah, they were the couple that had a joyless marriage because the wine ran out too soon. But I mean, that was entrenched in the culture. That was the understanding. And there would be devastating consequences for life to have a failed reception, a failed wedding feast. And like I said, many people were invited to this feast, all from the community. And so they would have all experienced either the success or the failure of this wedding feast. It was a while ago we were talking about, Shelby and I were having a conversation about her wedding someday. And she was talking about different places for where she might want to have her wedding. And my response, of course, was, well, it'll be right here at Grace. Of course it'll be here in the sanctuary. And she's talking about, well, no, I was thinking something smaller and not a lot of people, and I want to ride my horse, and don't think Pastor Dinger will let me ride a horse up the sanctuary aisle. I said, I'm sure we can talk him into it. Instead of a flower girl, Joshua will come along with a shovel, right? Anyway, we were talking about, and I said, lastly, right, it has to be here because it has to hold, we're going to invite the whole congregation. And so everybody has to have place to come. And that's the situation here for these newlyweds. They were really inviting the whole community to come and celebrate with them. But now the wine crisis, where Jesus' mother comes and says, we've run out of wine. And they don't even know that they've run out of wine. I don't think the newlyweds were aware of it. And I don't think that they were aware that Jesus solved the problem. But he did. And here's the key. Here's the key. When the newlyweds have not even known necessarily about their situation, Jesus comes to Jesus' mother comes to Jesus and says they've run out of wine. There's a crisis. And Jesus' response is very revealing about himself. First he says, "Dear woman." That's the actual translation, "Dear woman." It's a phrase that it connotates great honor and respect and love. It's been misinterpreted, I think, at sometimes, like almost Jesus saying, "Come on, Mom, I'm 30 years old," you know. But really what he's saying is, "Dear woman, you are treasured and honored and valued, but this is not my problem." That's what he's saying. Why have you involved me? This is not my problem. It's the newlyweds' problem. They didn't buy enough wine. They're running out. But what does Jesus do? While he says, "This is not my problem," he reveals how compassionate and gracious and merciful he is, because he steps in and solves their problem, which is exactly what he's done for each one of us. What he has done for every person. Our sin problem is not Jesus' problem. Literally and truthfully, he could say, "That is not my problem. Your sin is not my problem." But because of his compassion and love and grace, he says, "I will make it my problem. I will take your problem and make it my problem." All your problems, Jesus says, all your problems are his problems. And he shows you that grace and love by making our problem, our greatest need, our greatest problem, became his problem. So for these newlyweds, he takes away their shame and guilt by serving wine. And he restores their joy, right? But what he does for each one of us by taking our sin upon himself, dying on the cross, rising from the grave, is he took upon himself all of our shame and guilt and restores our joy. He gave us just what we needed when we needed it. He said, "I will make your problem my problem." But as mentioned, it was the mom, Jesus' mother, who came to him and let him know about the problem. So our second point is the mom. Now, maybe you've heard this commercial. It's a jewelry commercial, and it finishes with this statement. "Now you have a friend in the diamond business." Have you heard that one? The Shane Company, and it's the jewelry, and they're talking about selling jewelry, and at the very end, it's Tom Shane, in fact, the owner of the Shane Company, says to each one of us, "So now you have a friend in the diamond business." Meaning, I've got somebody on the inside, and I can get a great deal. I can go up to the Shane Company and say, "I know the owner. I have a friend in the diamond business. I can go and ask for a great deal or the best jewelry because I have somebody who I can talk to with boldness." Well, that's what Mary does. The mother of Jesus comes to Jesus with this kind of boldness and says, "Jesus, there's a wine problem. They are running out of wine." And she says, with this boldness, "I know I can make this request. I can make this request." She says, "I have this relationship with Jesus that I can ask him anything. I can be bold in my request for his grace and his mercy." And Jesus again honors his mother. He honors the newlyweds, and he welcomes this kind of boldness. He invites this kind of boldness. In fact, the author of Hebrews chapter 4 says, "Let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence and boldness." We can come to Jesus because we have already witnessed how gracious and loving he is towards us. We can ask him for anything. And that's exactly what Mary does. She says, "Jesus, here is the need. Your will be done." Here's the need. Your will be done. So it's not only with boldness, but with great humility and faith. And we see this. The evidence is that she turns to the servants and says, "So do whatever he tells you to do." Right? She is confident that Jesus will act out of love and grace and mercy. And so she turns to the servants. And the idea is almost this: no matter how crazy it may seem, whatever Jesus tells you to do, just do it. So filling ceremonial jars with water to the brim and then scooping some out and taking it to the master of the feast seems like that would be a little crazy. But Mary already trusted and believed that Jesus would act according to his good and perfect will on behalf of the newlyweds, on behalf of the families, that he would respond in grace and love. And so she asks with great boldness and faith in his will. Which brings us to the third individual at this party, the banquet master. Now, the banquet master is kind of an interesting individual. He's been brought in by the families, by the newlyweds, to monitor the feast, to monitor the drinking of the wine specifically, because if they start to run low, he's supposed to stretch it out. He's supposed to maybe even water it down. That's why he says the cheapest wine is last, and sometimes even the watered down wine is last. Hopefully nobody will notice. Maybe they'll just remember that it lasted. Because again, for him, if he fails at his job to monitor this wine consumption, then he's out of a job. He would not be able to get another job as the master of the feast or the master of the banquet anywhere in town, because he had their future in his hands. And so, interesting situation for him to be in. And so when the servants bring him this wine to taste before serving it, he says, oh my goodness, this is the best wine. You've saved the best till last. And he declares the glory of Christ even without realizing it. Right? There he is, declaring how the miracle, the glory, the grace of Jesus Christ, even though he didn't even know what Jesus Christ had done. Jesus Christ truly was the life of that party. Right? Because he turned water into wine, the party could continue. But more than that, he is the life. He delivers life. He gives peace and joy in any circumstance. And so what does this reveal again about Jesus Christ? It reveals that he is gracious, and that he gives his grace both abundantly and broadly to all. Jesus Christ, he loves to shower grace upon people, to give it out, much more than we could ever receive. And in fact, he is the best. And he gives the very best, both in quantity and quality. The master of the feast, the banquet master, he even identifies this. He says, we've got it backwards here. Typically, you would give the best wine first, save the worst till last, but now you've turned it all around, and the best is given last. Let me read again from John chapter 2. As they call, the master of the banquet calls the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. So here the bridegroom gets the credit for Jesus Christ's grace, but ultimately, the glory is due Christ, and he declares the glory of Christ to all. Which brings us to the last group. We've had the newlyweds, Jesus Christ's mother, the banquet master, all being part of this miracle as Jesus Christ has revealed his glory. But now we have the last group, the disciples, who really had no active role in the whole thing, right? You have the newlyweds, of course. They have an active role in this feast. You have Jesus' mother, who has an active role by pointing out that the wine is gone. You have the banquet master, who is the one who declares the miracle. He's the one who says, this is now wine. And then the disciples who came to this wedding with Jesus, probably even ate some of the food and drank some of the wine, have now caused part of this wine crisis, but they're just there watching, and having their lives impacted by seeing how Jesus lived and acted and gave. And it reminded me, as I was thinking about this sermon, how I have been so blessed by having people in my life that just by watching how they live, I have been impacted. I mean, I have a dear friend who I've learned to work from watching how he worked. Diligent and with excellence. And not only that, but he's one of the most generous people I know. Always giving. Always finding ways to share and be generous to others. And my life has been impacted just by watching how he lives. And then Teresa and I have had the blessing of having people in our lives that have marriages and relationships, husband and wife, that when we look at them, I mean, just being in their presence makes you want to have a marriage like theirs. And so we've been blessed. And just by watching how they treat one another and love one another, our lives have been impacted. And then I could go on, right? There's families that we've had interactions with, and watching how they've raised their children and the relationship they have with their children, even as they've grown, the children have grown into adulthood, and we think, that's what we want. We want to have those kinds of relationships with our kids as they grow and mature. And so just again, watching how they live has impacted us. And the disciples, I think, are in that same situation. They have watched how Jesus has taken somebody else's problem and made it his problem. They have watched how Jesus has been gracious and honoring to his mother in that relationship, and then gracious and honoring and spreading his grace to all who were there at the wedding. And they've watched all this take place and been impacted by it. You know, they didn't come and make the request for help. They didn't get the water. They didn't take the wine to the master of the banquet. They really, like I said, they didn't do anything. But they saw and they believed. They saw Jesus and they believed in him. As Jesus revealed his character and glory so that they could see, it evoked a response in them of faith. So again, John's summary statement is this: what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Jesus reveals his glory so that we will believe. My prayer has been for you this week, and will continue to be so, that you would see God's grace in your life. You know, maybe the newlyweds missed it. But my prayer for you is that you will see God's grace in your life. And not only that, but that you would seek God's grace with boldness and faith, just like Mary, the mother of Jesus, did. Seek his grace with boldness and faith. And then, just like the banquet master did, that you would be able to proclaim the glories of Christ, the glories of his saving work in your life. Most of all, my prayer for you is that you have seen Christ, his love, his grace, his work in and among you, and that you believe. To Christ be the glory. Amen.